Cale and Vance. Cale, to the handful of people who bothered with him, stared through the viewport as the transport shuttle docked with observation post Epsilon 7. The station hung like a forgotten ornament at the edge of known space, its weathered hull bearing the scars of decades of micrometeorite impacts and hasty repairs. Home sweet home, he muttered to no one in particular. The docking officer had stopped responding to his transmissions 15 minutes ago, probably bored with Cale's by-the-book approach to the docking procedure. He gathered his meager belongings, one standard-issue duffel of clothes and personal items, and one oversized toolkit that held everything from nano-precision screwdrivers to a compact molecular restructuring unit. The company had sent him here with a vague directive. Fix whatever's broken, keep the station running, don't ask unnecessary questions. The airlock cycled open with a wheeze that spoke of maintenance schedules long ignored. No welcoming committee awaited him. Just a dimly lit corridor that smelled of recycled air and the faint ozone tang of overworked electronics. Welcome to Observation Post Epsilon 7, Engineer Vance, the station's AI announced, its voice crackling through aging speakers. Current population, 7 organic beings. Current operational capacity, 68%. Current maintenance requests, 37, 12 classified as critical. Only 12 critical failures? Better than my last posting, Cale replied with a wry smile. The AI didn't respond to his attempt at humor, but he hadn't expected it to. Talking to machines was more about filling the silence than actual communication. Show me to my quarters, then run me through the priority list. The station seemed eerily quiet as he followed the pulsing guide lights embedded in the floor. Most research stations bustled with the energy of scientific discovery, but Epsilon 7 felt like a ghost ship. The few staff members he passed, a gaunt technician, a distracted astronomer, barely acknowledged his existence. His quarters were Spartan but adequate. A bed, a desk, storage, and a viewport that offered an unobstructed view of the endless void. He did worse. Engineer Vance, the AI interrupted as he was unpacking his tools. Request for immediate technical assistance in Laboratory 6. Life support systems experiencing critical fluctuations. Cale sighed. No rest for the wicked. On my way. Which system specifically? Atmospheric pressure regulation and temperature control. Requested by researcher Lyra. He grabbed his toolkit and headed out, following the AI's directions through the labyrinthine corridors of the station. Laboratory 6 was in the outer ring, isolated from the other research facilities, which struck him as odd. Most stations clustered their labs for efficiency and safety. The lab's entrance displayed warning lights and a hazard notification. Atmospheric anomaly detected. Researcher Lyra, he called through the intercom. This is Engineer Vance. I'm here about the life support issue. A moment of silence, then a cool, measured voice replied. Enter. The situation requires immediate attention. The door slid open, revealing a spacious laboratory filled with equipment he only partially recognized. Some appeared to be standard biological analysis tools, while others were clearly custom-built for specialized research. At the center stood a slender figure in a high-collared environmental suit that covered everything except her face. Lyra was unmistakably Xylosian. Her features were humanoid, but refined to an almost geometric precision. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, a straight nose, and lips that formed a perfect Cupid's bow. Her skin was the pale blue-gray typical of her species, but it was her eyes that caught his attention, large, deep violet orbs that seemed to evaluate him with scientific detachment. The primary atmospheric regulator is malfunctioning, she stated without preamble, gesturing toward a unit in the corner that was emitting an alarming series of beeps. Temperature has increased by 4 degrees in the last hour, and pressure is fluctuating beyond acceptable parameters for my specimens. Cale nodded, already moving toward the unit. I'll take a look. Any idea what triggered it? Negative. The malfunction began approximately 93 minutes ago during a standard experimental procedure. Her voice was melodious but carefully controlled, each word precisely enunciated. As he worked, Cale became aware of how Lyra maintained a careful distance, never coming within 2 meters of him. He'd heard that Xylosians were cautious about physical proximity, but this seemed extreme even by their standards. "Hand me that calibrator?" he asked, pointing to a tool on a nearby workbench. Instead of picking it up, she used a mechanical grabber to retrieve the tool and place it on the bench beside him, well within his reach, but ensuring no possibility of accidental contact. The regulator's diagnostic screen flickered as he ran tests. "There's a cascade failure in the molecular filter array," he explained. "Something's contaminated the primary sensor suite, and it's causing the whole system to go haywire. I need to power it down completely and reset." A sudden bang interrupted him as a pipe above the regulator burst, releasing a cloud of pressurized gas. Warning alarms blared as the station's AI announced, "Hazardous gas detected. Evacuate immediately." Kale lunged for the emergency shutoff valve, but his movement was arrested by a stream of crackling energy that arced from a nearby console, a power surge triggered by the failing systems. The electricity danced dangerously close to the expanding gas cloud. "Don't!" Lyra shouted. "The gas is highly reactive with electrical discharges." But it was too late. The arc jumped toward the gas cloud, and in that split second, Kale knew they were in serious trouble. A spark in that mixture could trigger an explosion that would breach the lab's hull. What happened next occurred so quickly he barely registered it. Lyra moved with astonishing speed, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. Her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist and yanking him away from the valve just as the electricity connected with the gas. Instead of the expected explosion, the gas merely ignited in a brief, controlled flash that the suppression systems immediately extinguished. Kale stumbled backward from the force of Lyra's pull, nearly colliding with her before catching himself against a workbench. The lab fell silent except for the hiss of the fire suppression system and their rapid breathing. It took him a moment to realize that Lyra was still holding his wrist, her slender fingers wrapped around it like a vice. When he looked at her, he was startled by what he saw. Her previously controlled expression had given way to wide-eyed shock, and her skin, the exposed portions of her face and neck, was rippling with waves of luminescent color. Electric blue, vibrant purple, flickering gold. The colors chased each other across her skin in chaotic patterns before she seemed to regain control, forcing them back to the neutral blue-gray. She released his wrist as if it had burned her, taking several quick steps backward. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her composure visibly shaken. "I apologize for the physical contact," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was necessary." "You saved me," Kale replied, rubbing his wrist. "Thank you." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, the colors beneath her skin still occasionally flickering through before being suppressed. Then, with a vulnerability he hadn't expected from her, she said, "You're the first human I ever touched." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with an implication Kale couldn't fully grasp. Before he could respond, she turned away, moving to a console to check on her specimens. "The emergency is contained," she said, her professional demeanor reasserting itself. "Please complete the repairs to the regulator. I must recalibrate certain parameters in my research." Kale nodded, turning back to the damaged system, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure how to ask. The days following the incident in Laboratory 6 took on a strange rhythm. Kale worked his way through the station's extensive list of maintenance requests, but he found himself frequently returning to Lyra's lab under various pretexts: follow-up checks, system optimizations, preventative maintenance. Each time, he attempted to engage her in conversation beyond the bare minimum required for the task at hand. "So, what exactly are you researching here?" he asked one afternoon while recalibrating his sensor array. Lyra looked up from her console, where complex molecular structures rotated in holographic display. "I study xenobiological adaptation mechanisms in extreme environments," she replied, her tone neutral but not dismissive. "Fascinating," Kale said, though he only had a vague understanding of what that entailed. "Is that why you're stationed at the edge of nowhere? Looking for extreme environments?" A slight flicker of violet rippled beneath the skin at her throat, so quick he might have imagined it, before she answered. Partially. Epsilon 7's position offers unique observational opportunities. The radiation profiles from the nearby stellar remnant create conditions that cannot be replicated elsewhere. Kale nodded. Try another angle. Must be lonely out here, though. Not much of a social scene. Xylosians do not seek social scenes as humans do, she replied, but her eyes remained on her work longer than necessary. Solitude is conducive to concentrated research. Right, of course. You focus on the sensor array, feeling awkward. I talk to machines when I'm alone too long. Probably drives the station AI crazy. To his surprise, this elicited a response. The AI is not sentient. Enough to experience crazy, Lyra said, and then added, but I understand the human need for verbal expression as a psychological stabilizing mechanism. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to personal conversation they'd managed so far. Over the following weeks, their interactions developed a cautious rhythm. Kale would offer observations or jokes, many of which fell flat, but occasionally prompted what he came to recognize as Lyra's version of amusement, a subtle lightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible softening of her precise movements. He also began to notice patterns in the subtle color changes that occasionally rippled across her visible skin, despite her obvious efforts to suppress them. Blues seemed to correlate with concentration, purples with interest or curiosity, while flashes of gold appeared in moments of surprise. Once, when he'd fixed a particularly troublesome piece of equipment that had frustrated her for days, he caught a glimpse of a warm rose color briefly illuminating her cheeks before she turned away. Lyra, for her part, began to volunteer small bits of information about her species that helped Kale understand her better. During one repair session, as he carefully maintained his distance while working on a console near her research station, she unexpectedly spoke. You wonder about the physical distancing protocols I maintain, she said, not looking at him, but clearly aware of his careful movements. I figured it was just a Xylosian thing, he replied, trying to sound casual. Everyone has their cultural preferences. It is more than preference, she explained, still focused on her work. Xylosians possess a form of neural sensitivity that your species might crudely compare to telepathy, though it is far more limited and physiologically based. Kale's hands stilled on the console. You can read minds? A flash of what might have been amusement crossed her features. No, we can sense emotional states and certain neural patterns when in proximity. Physical contact greatly amplifies this ability to the point of potential neural overload. So, when you touched me during the accident, it was intense, she admitted, finally looking at him. Your emotional state at that moment, fear, determination, confusion, transferred to me with considerable force. Is that why your skin did that color-changing thing? He asked, then immediately worried he'd been too forward. She didn't seem offended. Yes, our bioluminescence is tied to our physiological and emotional states. In civilized settings, we control it as you control your facial expressions. The unexpected neural input from our contact temporarily overwhelmed my control mechanisms. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. And that's why you said I was the first human you touched. Because for your species, touching is intimate, she finished. Potentially dangerous. Traditionally reserved for specific ceremonial or medical contexts, with extensive preparation. The implications hung heavy in the air. She had broken a profound taboo to save him from potential harm. Kale felt both honored and slightly overwhelmed by this knowledge. Thank you, he said simply, for taking that risk. She nodded once, and they returned to their respective tasks, but something had shifted between them. A deeper understanding, the first threads of genuine connection forming across the vast differences that separated their species and experiences. Their developing connection was tested 2 days later when Lyra accidentally knocked over a container of culture medium near a sensitive piece of equipment. Kale had to work quickly to prevent damage, positioning himself uncomfortably close to her as they both attempted to contain the spill and protect the machinery. Though they didn't touch, Kale was acutely aware of her presence just centimeters away, and he noticed the riot of colors flowing beneath her skin that she struggled to suppress. When their eyes met briefly in the midst of the cleanup, he saw something new there, not just the scientist's analytical gaze, but something warmer, curious, perhaps even conflicted. Later that evening, as Kale sat in the station's small observation lounge watching distant stars, Lyra unexpectedly joined him, taking a seat at a carefully measured distance. "May I ask you something personal, Engineer Vance?" she said after a moment of silence. "Just Kale is fine," he replied. "And sure, ask away." She seemed to consider her words carefully. "Why do you speak to machines? You know they cannot truly respond." The question caught him off guard. "I guess. It helps me think. Makes the silence less empty." He paused, looking out at the stars. "When you work solo missions as much as I do, you learn to create conversation where there isn't any, or you start to forget what your own voice sounds like." "Loneliness," she said, testing the word. "A human emotional state I have observed but never fully comprehended." "You've never felt lonely?" he asked. Her skin flickered with a deep blue he hadn't seen before. Xylosians value solitude. We are taught from childhood to find completeness within ourselves. But you're here, light years from your homeworld, surrounded by aliens who don't understand your culture. If that's not a recipe for loneliness, I don't know what is. She was quiet for so long that he thought he might have offended her. Finally, she spoke in a softer voice than he'd heard from her before. "Perhaps I am experiencing a form of isolation that approximates your concept of loneliness. It is not a state we have terminology for in my culture." Her skin rippled with blues and violets. "My presence on this station is not entirely by choice." Kale turned to face her fully. "What do you mean?" "My research diverges from conventional Xylosian scientific priorities. I am studying aspects of our biology that are considered inappropriate for formal investigation. The emotional neurological connection, specifically." She looked down at her hands. "I was offered this posting as an alternative to academic censure." "They exiled you for your research?" Kale asked, incredulous. "Exile would be an emotional characterization," she corrected, but didn't deny it. "I was provided an opportunity to continue my work away from the potential disruption it might cause in Xylosian academic circles." Kale shook his head. "Sounds like exile with extra steps." A flicker of rose appeared briefly at her throat. "Your colloquialism is not entirely inaccurate." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars. For the first time since arriving at Epsilon 7, Kale felt a genuine connection with another being, even if that being came from a world and culture he could barely comprehend. The routine they had established was shattered 3 weeks later when the station's proximity alarms blared to life in the middle of the sleep cycle. Kale was jolted awake by the AI's urgent announcement. "Attention, all personnel. Anomalous space-time disturbance detected at coordinates 227, mark 459. Intensity increasing. All non-essential systems diverting power to shields." This is not a drill. He stumbled out of bed and pulled on his uniform, rushing to the command center where the station's skeleton crew was already gathered around the main view screen. The image displayed a swirling mass of energy like a storm in space, growing rapidly as it approached the station. "What is that thing?" he asked the chief astronomer, a thin man named Hansen who rarely emerged from the telescope array room. "Some kind of quantum filament storm," Hansen replied, his eyes never leaving the display. "Never seen one this large or this active. The energy readings are off the charts." The station commander, a stern woman named Captain Reyes, turned to address the assembled crew. "The shields will hold against the initial wave, but the radiation surge will overload our systems if we can't stabilize the power grid. Engineering team, prepare for emergency protocols." As the others rushed to their stations, Kale noticed Lyra standing still, staring at the view screen with an intensity that seemed unusual even for her. Her skin was rippling with colors he'd never seen before, deep indigos and electric teals that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the distant storm. "Lyra," he approached her cautiously. "Are you all right?" She turned to him, her eyes wide. I can feel it, she whispered. The storm, it's generating neural resonant radiation patterns. It's calling to something in our biology. Before he could ask what she meant, Captain Reyes interrupted. Vance, we need you in the power core. The stabilizers are already starting to fluctuate. On my way, he replied, then turned back to Lyra. Stay safe. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency repairs and system overrides as the station shuddered under the assault of the space storm. Kale worked feverishly alongside the other engineers, rerouting power, bypassing damaged circuits, and manually operating systems that the overloaded computers couldn't handle. The situation grew increasingly dire as the storm intensified. Power failures cascaded through the station. Life support began to falter, and the protective shields weakened with each passing minute. We're losing the containment field around the stellar radiation samples in Laboratory 6. One of the technicians announced, his voice strained with fatigue. Kale's head snapped up. That's Lyra's lab. Without waiting for orders, he grabbed his toolkit and sprinted through the corridors toward the outer ring. If those samples were exposed, the resulting radiation could be catastrophic. When he reached Laboratory 6, he found the door sealed with emergency lockdown protocols. Through the viewport, he could see Lyra working frantically at a containment unit, her skin blazing with vibrant colors as she attempted to stabilize the failing systems. Lyra, he shouted through the intercom. I need to get in there. She looked up, and the fear in her eyes sent a chill through him. The override is non-functional, she replied, her voice crackling through the damaged speaker. The containment field is at 15% and falling. If it fails completely... I know, he cut her off. Stand back. I'm going to force the door. Using his override codes and some creative rewiring, Kale managed to bypass the security lockout. The door slid open with a protest of hydraulics, and he rushed into the lab just as another tremor shook the station. The primary containment unit is failing, Lyra explained as they both moved toward the glowing cylinder at the center of the lab. And the backup generator isn't engaging. We need to manually stabilize the magnetic field while transferring the samples to the secure repository. Kale examined the system quickly. The transfer mechanism is fried. We'll have to do it manually. I'll stabilize the field from this console while you initiate the transfer sequence. They worked in perfect synchronization, Kale's technical expertise complementing Lyra's scientific knowledge. As the storm outside intensified, the lights in the lab flickered and died, leaving only the emergency illumination and the eerie glow of the containment unit. Field strength down to 8%, Lyra announced, her voice steady despite the crisis. Transfer sequence ready, but I cannot complete it without direct neural interface. The automated systems are offline. Neural interface? Kale looked up from his console. What does that mean? Her skin pulsed with deep purple and electric blue. Xylosion technology sometimes incorporates biological components that respond to our neural emissions. I can interface directly with the system, but what? The storm is amplifying all neural signals. If I attempt the interface, I may not be able to maintain control of the process. She looked at him directly, her eyes intense. I would need an anchor, a stabilizing presence. Understanding dawned. You need me to touch you, to help ground you somehow. She nodded once, sharply. The risk is significant. The neural feedback could be overwhelming for both of us. But without the transfer, the containment will fail within minutes. Another violent shudder ran through the station, and warning lights flashed on Lyra's console. Field at 5%, she said quietly. We must decide now. Kale moved closer to her, his heart pounding. What I need to do? Place your hands on my shoulders, she instructed, turning to the specialized console. Focus your thoughts on stability, on calm. Your emotional state will influence the connection. Taking a deep breath, Kale positioned himself behind her and gently laid his hands on her shoulders. The instant of contact was electric. He could feel a strange vibration beneath her skin, and the colors that rippled across it seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. Lyra gasped, her back arching slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, Her hands moved to the console, pressing against specific patterns that began to glow in response to her touch. "Initiating transfer sequence," she said, her voice strained. "Neural interface active." What happened next defied Kale's understanding of physics and biology. The colors flowing across Lyra's skin intensified, becoming so bright they illuminated the darkened lab. He felt a strange pressure in his mind, as if something was pushing against the boundaries of his consciousness. Then, abruptly, he wasn't just himself anymore. He could feel Lyra's presence, not just physically beneath his hands, but mentally, emotionally. Fragments of memories that weren't his flashed through his mind. A crystalline city beneath twin suns, the sensation of swimming in a sea of bioluminescent organisms, the precise, controlled environment of a Xylosian scientific academy. And feelings, so many feelings that Lyra had kept carefully contained behind her controlled exterior. Curiosity about humans, frustration with the limitations placed on her research, loneliness that she had never acknowledged even to herself, and something else, a growing fascination with him specifically. "Focus!" Lyra's voice cut through the flood of shared consciousness. "The transfer is at 30%. I need your stability." Kale concentrated, pushing aside the disorientation of the shared experience to focus on what she needed. Calm, groundedness, the steady certainty that came from years of solving practical problems with his hands and mind. He visualized the energy flowing through them both, channeled and controlled rather than chaotic. The transfer percentage climbed steadily on the display. 45%, 60%, 75%. Outside, the storm howled against the station's hull, but within their shared consciousness, a strange calm had descended. "Almost complete, Lyra," whispered, though Kale wasn't sure if she had spoken aloud or if he had simply felt her intention. As the transfer reached 95%, a sudden surge in the storm's intensity rocked the station violently. Lyra cried out, her concentration faltering as the neural interface fluctuated dangerously. Without thinking, Kale tightened his grip on her shoulders and pressed his forehead against the back of her head, completing the physical connection between them. "I'm here," he said, projecting all the steadiness he could muster. "We're finishing this together." The surge of connection that followed was beyond anything he could have imagined. For a brief, eternal moment, the boundaries between them dissolved completely. He was Lyra, experiencing the overwhelming sensory input of Xylosian perception, the world as a tapestry of emotions and energies rather than just physical stimuli. She was Kale, feeling the grounded certainty of his human consciousness, rooted in the physical rather than the ephemeral. The display flashed. Transfer complete. Containment secure. With a gasp, Lyra broke the connection, staggering forward away from his touch. Kale stumbled backward, his mind reeling from the intensity of what they had just experienced. For several moments, they both stood in silence, processing what had happened. Lyra turned to face him, her skin still radiating vibrant colors that she no longer attempted to suppress. Her eyes were wide, filled with wonder and uncertainty. "Are you okay?" Kale asked, his voice hoarse. "I am. Processing," she replied carefully. "The connection was far more profound than I anticipated." The storm's energy amplified everything. Before they could discuss it further, the station's AI announced, "Anomalous space-time disturbance dissipating. Shield integrity returning to normal parameters. All personnel report status." They were called back to their duties, the immediate crisis demanding attention. But as they parted at the laboratory door, Lyra placed her hand briefly, deliberately on Kale's arm. A gesture that would have been casual for a human, but was profoundly significant coming from her. "We will speak of this later," she said, her eyes conveying far more than her words. The aftermath of the space storm left Epsilon, 7 battered but intact. Crews worked around the clock to repair damaged systems and restore the station to full functionality. Kale threw himself into the repairs, partly from duty and partly to avoid confronting what had happened between him and Lyra during the crisis. He didn't see her for 3 days. When they finally encountered each other again, it was in the observation lounge late in the station's artificial night cycle. Kale had gone there seeking solitude, only to find Lyra already present, gazing out at the now calm region of space where the storm had raged. "I wonder when you would come," she said without turning around. "Your emotional signature has been unsettled." Kale approached cautiously, taking a seat at the same careful distance they had maintained before. "You can sense that, even without touching." "After our connection, yes." She turned to face him, and he was struck by how different she looked. The rigid control she had always maintained over her appearance had softened. Subtle colors shifted beneath her skin like aurora borealis, no longer completely suppressed. The neural pathways established during our interface remained partially active. "So you can read my mind now?" he asked, only half joking. A flicker of that rose color he was beginning to associate with amusement crossed her features. "No, but I am aware of your emotional state in a general sense when you're nearby. It is unusual, unprecedented in Xylosian research." "Is that bad?" he asked. "For you, I mean, given what you told me about why you're here." She considered this. "It is scientifically fascinating. Personally, complex." Her gaze met his directly. "What did you experience during our connection?" Kale took a deep breath, trying to put the indescribable into words. "I felt you, not just your thoughts or memories, though there were flashes of those. I felt what it's like to be you, to perceive the world the way you do, to feel emotions the way you do." He paused, searching for the right words. "It was like suddenly having a sense I never knew existed." Lyra nodded, colors flowing more rapidly beneath her skin. "I experienced something similar. Human consciousness is remarkably focused, grounded in physical reality in a way that is both limiting and liberating. You possess a clarity of purpose that my species often lacks." "And now," Kale gestured between them, "where does this leave us?" "I do not know," she admitted, a rare uncertainty in her voice. "The connection we established is without precedent. In Xylosian society, even the most intimate partnerships involve carefully regulated neural exchange, usually through technological intermediaries. What we experienced was..." She trailed off. "Raw," Kale supplied. "Unfiltered." "Yes." Her skin pulsed with deep purple. "In many ways, it contradicts everything my culture teaches about neural interaction. Yet I cannot deny the scientific value of what occurred, nor what?" he prompted when she hesitated. "Nor the personal significance," she finished quietly. "I have never experienced such complete understanding with another being." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between them. Finally, Kale spoke. "So where do we go from here? Can we, I don't know, learn to manage this connection? Study it, maybe?" He offered a small smile. "That's what scientists do, right? Study the unknown." The tension in her posture eased slightly, and the colors beneath her skin shifted to warmer hues. "Yes, that would be a logical approach. Though I must warn you, continuing to explore this connection may have unforeseen consequences. It could change us both in ways we cannot predict. Life on the edge of known space is all about facing the unpredictable," Kale replied. "I'm willing to take that risk if you are." Her response was interrupted by the station's AI. "Attention, all personnel. Unidentified vessel approaching. Designation and origin unknown. All senior staff report to the command center immediately." Lyra rose gracefully to her feet. "It seems our exploration will have to wait. As the senior xenobiologist, I am required at this briefing. And they'll probably need someone from engineering when something inevitably breaks," Kale added with a wry smile, standing as well. As they walked toward the command center, Lyra broke their usual protocol by walking close beside him, near enough that their arms almost brushed. It was a small gesture, but its significance wasn't lost on Kale. Whatever lay ahead, something fundamental had changed between them. Boundaries crossed that could never be re-established. The command center was already crowded when they arrived. Captain Reyes stood before the main view screen, which displayed an unusual vessel approaching the station. Its design was like nothing Kale had ever seen, organic curves rather than the angular efficiency of human ships, with a surface that seemed to pulse with inner light reminiscent of Lyra's bioluminescence. "A Xylosian vessel," Lyra whispered, her skin suddenly pale, the colors receding beneath the surface. "A convergence ship. Is that bad?" Kale asked quietly. Before she could answer, Captain Reyes addressed the room. "We're receiving a transmission from the approaching vessel. They identify themselves as representatives of the Xylosian Convergence of Minds, here to retrieve research materials and personnel." All eyes turned to Lyra, whose composure had returned but whose skin remained unnaturally still, as if she were exerting tremendous effort to suppress any color changes. "They're here for me," she stated simply. "And my research." Captain Reyes nodded. "They've requested permission to dock and have presented credentials that appear legitimate. However, given that researcher Lyra's assignment to this station was arranged through proper diplomatic channels, I see no reason to comply with any request for her removal without proper authorization." "Thank you, Captain," Lyra said, "but I should warn you, the Convergence does not recognize many standard diplomatic protocols. They operate under their own authority within Xylosian society." "Meaning," the captain prompted. "Meaning they may not accept your refusal," Lyra explained. "They consider my research dangerous, a threat to the neural harmony of our species. If they discover the nature of my recent findings, they will be even more determined." "Our connection," Kale realized. "She's protecting our discovery." "What exactly are they after?" Captain Reyes asked, her eyes narrowing. Lyra hesitated, then answered carefully. "My research involves the neurological basis of Xylosian abilities, specifically how they might be adapted or enhanced through controlled interaction with other species. The Convergence believes such research violates our biological sovereignty and could lead to cultural contamination. And they're not entirely wrong," she added quietly, so only Kale could hear. Captain Reyes considered this information. "We'll stall them with bureaucratic procedures while we contact Starfleet Command for instructions. In the meantime, Engineer Vance, I want you to secure researcher Lyra's laboratory and research data. Transfer everything to secure storage." "Yes, Captain," Kale replied, already planning how to protect not just Lyra's physical research, but the evidence of their unprecedented neural connection. As the briefing concluded and the crew dispersed to their assigned tasks, Lyra caught Kale's arm in a deliberate gesture that shocked those nearby who knew Xylosian customs. "Be careful," she said, her voice low and intense. "The Convergence has technology that can detect neural resonance patterns. If they scan the station and find evidence of our connection, then we'd better make sure they don't get the chance," Kale replied. "Meet me in your lab in 20 minutes. We need to prepare." The next few hours passed in tense activity as they worked to secure Lyra's research. Using his engineering expertise, Kale created false data trails and decoy research files while Lyra carefully documented and encrypted her actual findings. They worked in close proximity now, the pretense of careful distance abandoned in the face of the looming threat. "Why didn't you tell me the full nature of your research before?" Kale asked as they worked. "That it was specifically about interaction with other species?" Lyra's skin rippled with deep blue. Regret, he now recognized. "Because such research is considered transgressive in my culture. The Convergence believes that Xylosian neural abilities should remain pure, untainted by outside influence." She paused in her work, looking at him directly. "My people fear what they do not understand. They fear change, evolution, the unknown. They fear people like you," Kale observed. "Scientists who ask uncomfortable questions." A flicker of violet acknowledgement. "Yes. And now they fear what we have discovered even more. A direct neural link between Xylosian and human consciousness, formed without technological mediation, amplified by the quantum storm." Her colors shifted to a concerned indigo. "It challenges everything they believe about our neural sovereignty. If it helps, it challenged everything I believed about human consciousness too," Kale said with a wry smile. The rose color he'd come to associate with her version of amusement briefly flowered across her skin. "Indeed. But your species embraces such challenges. Mine seeks to contain them. The station's AI interrupted their conversation. Attention. Xylosian vessel has docked. Representatives of the Convergence of Minds request immediate audience with station leadership and research specialist Lyra. Lyra's skin paled to an ashen gray. They will attempt to scan me, to determine if I have engaged in prohibited neural exchanges. Standard procedure when they suspect contamination. Can you block it? Shield yourself somehow. Kale asked, securing the last of the encrypted research files. Not entirely, but the quantum storm residue still affecting the station might provide enough interference to obscure recent neural activity. She looked at him with sudden intensity. But you must stay away from the meeting. Your presence, the resonance between us, would be detectable to their sensors. Kale nodded, though he disliked the idea of Lyra facing the Convergence alone. I'll monitor from the secondary control room. If anything goes wrong, do not intervene directly, she said firmly. The Convergence would consider it evidence of human interference and could escalate the situation beyond Captain Reyes' ability to manage diplomatically. Before Kale could argue, the AI announced, Research Specialist Lyra, your presence is requested in the main conference room immediately. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, her skin settling into a determined, even pattern of deep blue. When she opened them again, she appeared composed, the controlled, distant researcher he had first met weeks ago. Whatever happens, she said quietly, our connection has value. Scientific value, yes, but also... Her colors shifted subtly to a hue he hadn't seen before, something like the soft glow of sunrise. Personal value. Remember that. With that enigmatic statement, she left the laboratory, her posture straight and dignified as she walked toward what they both knew could be the end of her time on Epsilon 7. Kale wasted no time making his way to the secondary control room, where he could access the security feeds from the conference room. When the display activated, he saw Captain Reyes, Lyra, and 3 Xylosian visitors seated around the conference table. The Convergence representatives were striking figures. Unlike Lyra, who typically wore practical scientific attire, they were dressed in flowing garments that seemed to enhance rather than conceal the luminescent patterns flowing across their skin. Their movements were synchronized in an unsettling way, as if they operated with a shared consciousness. The lead representative, distinguished by elaborate markings on his face, spoke in a melodious but coldly precise voice that the translation system rendered in slightly delayed English. The Convergence appreciates your cooperation, Captain Reyes. However, our business is primarily with Specialist Lyra. Her research assignment has been terminated by consensus of the Scientific Oversight Committee. Captain Reyes maintained a diplomatic expression. We were not informed of any change in Specialist Lyra's status through official channels. As you know, her assignment here was arranged through the Interspecies Scientific Exchange Protocol, which requires formal notification. The Xylosian leader raised a hand, interrupting her. The situation has evolved beyond such procedural concerns. Information has reached the Convergence suggesting that Specialist Lyra has engaged in research explicitly prohibited by Xylosian ethical standards. The leader turned to Lyra, whose expression remained carefully neutral. You were sent here to study environmental adaptation mechanisms. Instead, you have pursued your obsession with cross-species neural integration, have you not? Kale tensed as he watched Lyra consider her response. She was in an impossible position, deny the truth and be caught in a lie their scanning technology would detect, or admit to research the Convergence deemed forbidden. My research has followed the approved protocols, Lyra replied evenly. If in the course of standard observations, additional data was collected that proved scientifically relevant, I documented it, as any responsible researcher would. The lead Xylosian skin flashed with a harsh, bright pattern that the translator didn't interpret, but that clearly indicated displeasure. You speak in careful evasions, specialist. Perhaps a direct neural assessment will provide clarity. He gestured, and one of the other representatives produced a device that resembled a crystalline headset. This will allow us to evaluate your recent neural activities and determine the extent of any contamination. Kale's hands clenched into fists as he watched. The neural assessment sounded suspiciously like forced mind reading. Captain Reyes seemed to share his concern. I must object to any invasive procedures being conducted on my station without proper medical oversight and consent, the captain stated firmly. This is not a medical procedure, Captain, but a cultural one, the Xylosian leader countered smoothly. Specialist Lyra is a citizen of the Xylosian Convergence and subject to its protocols regarding neural purity. She understood these conditions when she accepted her scientific appointment. Lyra nodded slightly. I did, Captain, and I am prepared to undergo the assessment. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the security camera, toward Kale, with a message he couldn't quite interpret. As the Convergence representative approached with the crystal headset, the station suddenly shuddered violently. Warning klaxons blared, and the lights flickered. Attention all personnel, the AI announced. Quantum storm residue reactivating. Unusual energy patterns detected throughout the station. All systems experiencing fluctuations. The Xylosian visitors looked alarmed, their skin patterns shifting rapidly. The leader turned accusingly to Captain Reyes. What is happening? Apparently the storm we encountered recently has left more significant after-effects than we realized, she replied, already rising from her seat. I need to attend to station safety. This meeting will have to be postponed. We will accompany Specialist Lyra to secure her research materials, the Convergence leader insisted. The quantum disturbance could damage valuable data. Kale didn't wait to hear more. He sprinted from the control room toward Laboratory 6, understanding suddenly what Lyra had done. The quantum storm residue was no natural occurrence. She had somehow activated the stored energy sample from the storm, creating a diversion. When he reached the laboratory, he found Lyra already there, working rapidly at her console. Clever distraction, he said, securing the door behind him. But it won't hold them for long. Long enough, she replied without looking up. I've isolated a quantum signature from the storm, one that resonates with the neural frequency we established during our connection. It's creating enough interference to prevent their scanning technology from functioning properly. So what's the plan? Hide until they give up and leave. Lyra's skin cycled through colors so rapidly it almost made him dizzy. No, that would only delay the inevitable. I've been considering our options since the Convergence ship was detected. She paused, finally meeting his eyes. There is one possibility, but it carries significant risk. I'm listening, Kale said, moving closer to her. The quantum storm created a temporary bridge between dimensions, a point where the barriers between different states of reality thinned, she explained. My instruments detected a potentially habitable pocket dimension, accessible through precisely calibrated quantum resonance. Kale stared at her. You're talking about escaping to another dimension? Is that even possible? Theoretically, and our neural connection provides the perfect calibration tool. Her skin settled into determined blue. The Convergence cannot follow where they cannot perceive. A dimension resonant with our unique neural pattern would be invisible to them. What about the rest of the station? The crew? We can't just disappear without explanation, Kale argued, though he was already considering the possibilities. Lyra touched her console, bringing up a message she had prepared. This explains everything to Captain Reyes, my research, the Convergence's true motives, and our decision. It includes coordinates for potential future contact, should dimensional barriers thin again. Our decision, Kale repeated, raising an eyebrow. You're assuming I'm coming with you. Her colors dimmed slightly. I apologize for the presumption. Of course, this is my situation to resolve. You have no obligation. I didn't say I wasn't coming, he interrupted with a slight smile. Just pointing out that you're getting ahead of yourself. Besides, I doubt your dimensional gateway would work without both of us, given that the neural connection between us is what makes it possible. The brilliant colors that flooded her skin told him all he needed to know about her relief. The connection must be fully open for the transition to succeed, she explained, regaining her composure. More complete than before. It would mean, she hesitated. Total neural connection, Kale finished for her. No barriers. Everything that makes you you and me, completely shared. Yes. And once done, it cannot be undone. We would remain connected, though the intensity would likely diminish over time. The implications were staggering. Not just leaving behind his life, his career, his species, but potentially losing some fundamental aspect of his individual identity in emerging with another consciousness. Yet strangely, the prospect didn't terrify him as it should have. "How long do we have before your distraction fails?" he asked. "Minutes at most. The convergence technicians will stabilize the fluctuations soon." Cale took a deep breath, looking around the laboratory that had become the center of the most profound experience of his life. "Well, I was getting tired of fixing broken environmental regulators anyway. How do we do this?" Lyra's skin glowed with an intensity that lit the room. "The containment unit where we transferred the quantum samples. It's been modified to serve as a resonance chamber. We must enter it together and establish full neural contact at precisely the moment when the quantum frequency peaks." Working quickly, they prepared the chamber, Lyra programming the precise frequency patterns while Cale modified the environmental controls to support them during the transition. All the while, they could hear the station's AI reporting the gradual stabilization of systems as the convergence technicians countered Lyra's distraction. Finally, everything was ready. The cylindrical chamber, normally used to contain hazardous materials, now hummed with quantum energy, its interior bathed in shifting light that mirrored the patterns on Lyra's skin. They stood before the open chamber door, the reality of what they were about to attempt suddenly overwhelming. "Second thoughts?" Lyra asked, observing his hesitation. "About a dozen," Cale admitted with a nervous laugh. "But somehow none strong enough to stop me." The station's AI interrupted. "Warning. Unauthorized access attempt at Laboratory 6. Security protocols engaged." "They're coming," Lyra said quietly. "We must decide now." Cale looked at her, really looked at her. The alien being who had gone from stranger to something undefined but precious in the span of a few short weeks. The scientist whose curiosity matched his own. The woman who had touched him, saved him, connected with him in ways no human ever had. "I decided the moment you said, 'You're the first human I ever touched,'" he replied. "I just didn't know it yet." The door to the laboratory shuddered as override commands were initiated from outside. They had seconds, not minutes. Lyra held out her hand, a deliberate, conscious offer of contact so different from their first accidental touch. "Then let us discover together what lies beyond known space." Cale took her hand, feeling the now familiar surge of connection as their neural patterns began to synchronize. Together, they stepped into the chamber as the laboratory door slid open behind them, revealing the convergence representatives and Captain Reyes. The quantum resonance reached its peak as the chamber door sealed. Lyra placed her free hand against Cale's face, establishing the full neural contact needed for the transition. The world around them dissolved into pure energy and sensation as their consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations. In that moment of perfect connection, Cale understood Lyra completely. Her childhood under the twin suns of her home world, her struggle against cultural constraints, her scientific passion, her growing affection for him. And she understood him. His loneliness masked by humor, his search for meaning in the vastness of space, his need for connection disguised as self-sufficiency. They were two, beings becoming something new while still remaining themselves, a paradox made possible by quantum physics and the mysterious compatibility of their minds. The last thing they heard before the dimensional shift completed was the convergence leader's cry of dismay as the chamber filled with brilliant light, and then silence. A different kind of silence than either had ever experienced, filled with possibility rather than emptiness. When awareness returned, they stood in a landscape unlike any they had known, a realm where thought and matter seemed interchangeable, where the colors of Lyra's emotions painted the sky, and where the solid practicality of Cale's mind formed islands of certainty in a sea of quantum probability. They were still holding hands, still connected, though the overwhelming intensity of the transition had settled into something sustainable, a constant awareness of each other that felt like coming home rather than intrusion. "Where are we?" Kale asked, his voice somehow both audible and unnecessary as Lyra could sense his question before he spoke it. "Somewhere new," she replied, her skin glowing with colors he now understood represented joy, wonder, and a deep contentment. "Somewhere we can explore together." He could feel her scientific curiosity already cataloging their surroundings, while his engineer's mind was assessing the physical properties of this strange new realm. They were still themselves, human and Xylosian, but also something more, something unprecedented. "You know," Kale said as they began walking toward a distant formation that had caught both their attention. "For a first contact situation, we probably broke every protocol in the book." The burst of rose-colored amusement that flowed from Lyra through their connection made the very air around them shimmer. "Indeed. But then, meaningful discoveries rarely follow established protocols." As they moved forward into their new reality, the connection between them, begun with a desperate touch in a moment of crisis, continued to evolve and deepen. Not just the first human she had ever touched, but the only one she would remain connected to across dimensions, across whatever strange future awaited them at the true edge of known space. In this realm where thought shaped reality, their shared consciousness created something neither could have imagined alone, a home built from understanding, curiosity, and the simple, profound truth that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from peering into the depths of space, but from reaching across the void to touch another being.